to this episode of Equalizer. My name is William Acosta, where we bring you real stories and raw insights from those who have stood in the front lines of law enforcement, intelligence, and security operations worldwide. Today, we are honored to sit down with retired special agent from the DEA, Mr. Michael Brown, a veteran law enforcement agent whose career path spans over 3 decades, including 20 years in overseas assignments in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. A graduate of the U.S. Army Ranger Academy in Fort Benning, Georgia, Michael went on to serve with distinction in Operation Snowcap, conducting jungle-based counter-drug missions throughout Latin America. Later, as a DEA Country Attache for Myanmar, he helped lead the groundbreaking program using Raman spectrometry to interdict precursors chemicals fueling global narcotic production. In this episode, we'll explore his field experience, the challenges of international drug enforcement, and the evolving global fight against narcotic trafficking. Good morning, Michael. Thank you for being with us today in the podcast. Tell us a little bit about you, so the audience will get a feel of who you are.
Yes, certainly. So after graduating from University of Cincinnati, I joined the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration in 1989, and then went on to participate in one of their special operation programs called Operation Snowcap. Now, Operation Snowcap was a boots on the ground drug interdiction program, which had DEA agents first go to the U.S. Army Ranger School for specialized training, and then we were deployed to various countries in Central and South America to assist host countries in dealing with what I call the center of gravity for drug production. So we were going after clandestine drug labs, precursor chemicals, fugitives, and the whole host of on-the-ground basic drug interdiction. So I did that for about 4 to 5 years. And then I went on to do about 20 years working in various countries overseas. I did 10 years in Pakistan. I did a year in Afghanistan, a year in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, Central Asia. I did some time in Myanmar and some time in India. Now, I finished my career working at DEA headquarters in Washington, where I continued to work and support DEA country offices that were based around the world. And then I worked for a year and a half on a specialized whole of government approach task force dealing with the fentanyl issue. After retiring roughly about 5 years ago, I started privately to consult with law enforcement, foreign agencies, governments in the safety and security field.
That's a very impressive career and a lot of knowledge. What specific intelligence or threat assessment convinced U.S. policymakers at the time that a large-scale rural counter-narcotics campaign like Operation Snowcap was necessary in the Andes in the mid-1980s?
Well, when you look at drug trafficking, right, global drug trafficking, Mexican cartels, Colombian cartels, America's drug problem is based on 2 things. One, consumption. There's a demand. We can't deny that. There's a demand for various drugs, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, which we as a country are working on and need to put more effort into it. But that demand is fueled by the production of illicit narcotics, which does not take place in the United States. Now, having worked overseas in those drug production countries, I believe Snowcap was probably the best program the United States government ever had because it dealt with the problem at the center of gravity. Drugs are not produced in the United States. They are produced in other countries, primarily Colombia and Mexico. And if the U.S. really wants to get a hold of the drug problem, we have to be more involved in the international effort to go after the cartels on their home base.
How did Operation Snowcap build and the fear from the earlier Operation Blast Furnace conducted in Bolivia in 1986?
Well, I spent most of my time in Bolivia, almost 4.5 years. I did some time in Guatemala and Honduras. But the operations in Bolivia were extremely aggressive. We had dozens of agents working all throughout Bolivia, some in Chimare going after what we call the first stage of drug production, where the coca paste is made. And then I was working further south towards the Amazon jungle in a city called Trinidad, where we were going after the clandestine laboratories where cocaine was produced. We were going after the essential precursor chemicals, which are an absolute necessity in making semi-synthetic narcotics in the jungle. We went after the airplanes, the small Cessnas, which were essential for transporting the produced cocaine out of the jungles to areas where they could be then distributed and transported to the United States. We went after the airstrips. We went after the fugitives. So it was a comprehensive, holistic program that was focused on shutting down the ability of Bolivia to produce and transport cocaine, in massive tons, basically.
Snowcap, as an operation, was a volunteer basis where agents were assigned on a 90-day basis rotation, but some agents could do 2 to 3 tours a year of 90 days. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Snowcap, it had to be a voluntary program because agents were volunteering, one, to go to the U.S. Army Ranger assessment. If you passed the assessment, which many did not, then you went on to a very realistic U.S. Army Ranger training program, with the exception of airborne operations and desert operations for obvious reasons. So that in itself was a grueling activity to get through the Ranger School qualification. And then, of course, you're volunteering to go into various countries in Central and South America where you're going to be working in the jungles with host country counterparts, putting yourself directly in a high threat, austere environment. The cartel was one of the least things you had to worry about. You had to worry about the mosquitoes getting malaria. You had to worry about the snakes. You had to worry about other indigenous threats that come with working in the jungle. So certainly agents who volunteered for that program were probably some of the most motivated agents that I've ever met in DEA. And of course, some were able to do multiple back-to-back tours, further showing their contribution and dedication to working in those environments to reduce the amount of narcotics coming into the United States.
How did the Reagan administration broaden the war on drugs agenda shape the scope of aggressive operations like a Snowcap? Because he had never been seen before where law enforcement officers went on and taking a role as paramilitary units in the ground, boots in the ground, which is completely different than what the DEA training gives you when you come out of the academy.
Well, President Reagan was one of the first presidents to realize that if we were going to have any hope of actually, I won't even say defeating, but degrading the overall capability of the cartels, especially in Colombia, that DEA had to be working side by side with host country counterparts in Bolivia and in Colombia. And I think, the activities in Colombia, DEA played a primary role in taking down Pablo Escobar and bringing it in not only to the Medellin cartel, but to the Cali cartel. So President Reagan's plan of moving the front line from the streets of the United States to the actual countries where drugs were produced, in my opinion, and still is the only way we're going to actually affect a reduction in bringing narcotics into this country.
There were 2 major accidents, one that happened in 1989 and one that happened in 1994, that kind of really brought reality into the workforce of the DEA because of so many lives lost because of the way the accidents happened. They were not knocked down, or they were more or less technical issues and weather issues. How did the morale change in each accident?
Well, the worst accident issue was, we lost the DEA Acosta with a number of agents that went down. Lost a lot of good friends on that flight. And that just goes more to show how dangerous it was working, and still is working in those countries. DEA and the Academy, we're not trained to work in those austere environments. Our pilots are not trained to fly in those austere environments, right? So that just showed DEA that if we're going to be in those countries, we have to broaden our scope of expertise in working in those hostile environments, much like the military. The concept of paramilitary the bar needs to be raised much higher for training and the quality of agents who can qualify for those programs. Fast forward, Operation Fast in Afghanistan was a similar program, and we lost agents in Afghanistan. Now realize we're putting agents on the front line with highly trained, highly motivated insurgency or terrorist actors, such in Afghanistan, the Taliban or Al Qaeda, who are heavily involved in narcotics trafficking. And of course, in Central America, dealing with the FARC and other revolutionary insurgency groups, to include the cartel. So, people really need to understand this was not a vacation. These operations, and even today, are very, very dangerous and could come with some casualties.
In the region of Peru, you have Sendero Luminoso, which was guarding most of the cultivation, the plantations at that time, and they were also charging a tax to the people coming to buy product from Colombia, because at the time, Colombia is not like it is now. Colombia became what they call the Snowcap effect, where after the operation, Colombia became the number one producer, more or less, and more plantations per acre than Bolivia and Peru. They were the leaders at that time.
Yeah, certainly Colombia then and now is the primary producer of cocaine. You have some cocaine being produced in Peru. Bolivia primarily produces multi-ton quantities of coca paste, which are then transshipped to Peru and Colombia for cocaine refinement. But as you mentioned earlier, Sendero Luminoso at that time was an insurgency group, right? A communist-based Marxist insurgency group fighting the country of Bolivia and using that tax from narcotics to fund their revolutionary operations. But today I would say Sendero Luminoso is now a drug trafficking organization, just like the FARC and ELN, FLN, I believe it's ELN. I'm sorry, ELN in Colombia, who all started out as Marxist-based revolutionary groups, realized there were millions and millions of dollars to be made in not only protecting or taxing drug production, but to be involved directly with drug production. So we see a paradigm shift from revolutionary groups using narcotics to fund revolutionary activities to revolutionary groups transitioning into narco-terrorists to make money.
What concerns, if any, were raised by the U.S. State Department and U.S. Embassy about the mission creep from counter-narcotics into counterinsurgency?
Well, it started under Pablo Escobar. I mean, he was really the first major drug cartel who revolutionized the production of cocaine and its international transshipment. But then we saw how a low-level criminal could rise to be the head of a major drug cartel that, what I call, metastasized into the first narco-terrorist organization, right? Pablo Escobar, he blew up an airliner, killing hundreds of people. He attacked the Colombian parliament with tanks. He enlisted, I believe it was M19, a terrorist organization or insurgency group, to attack the country of Colombia. This was a full-on narco-terrorist insurgency taking place by a drug cartel leader. So we saw not just mission creep, but how fast narco-trafficking or narco-trafficking groups could metastasize into narco-terrorists. And that's exactly what we have today in Mexico with the president's recent designation of those top foreign terrorist narco trafficking organizations, primarily the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. I mean, in the last 7 years in Mexico, I believe over 250,000 non-combatants have been killed by narco-terrorist activity. So the mission it's creeped. Now we're dealing with narco-terrorist organizations who are flooding the country with deadly fentanyl, poisoning tens of thousands of people, in addition to cocaine, methamphetamine, and still heroin coming into the country.
Were alternative strategies such as demand reduction, financial sanctions, or intelligence-led interdiction closer to the U.S. border seriously considered as substitutes for large rural offensives?
Well, I think after Snowcap was terminated for a number of reasons, U.S. DEA and other law enforcement organizations concentrated on fighting the battle within the U.S. borders, right? So we increased diversion operations, tracking pharmaceutical shipments, illicit pharmaceutical transshipments with like Oxycontin, which really led to the opioid crisis. We put more attention on the border with Customs and Border Protection, trying to interdict drug shipments coming into the U.S. across the Mexican border, and also narcotic shipments via Go Fast through the Caribbean into the United States and through the Pacific side into California. So we put, I would say, over the last 20 years, trillions of dollars into fortifying the U.S. border in an attempt to mitigate or reduce the amount of narcotics being shipped into this country. But in my opinion, those efforts, they have reduced it to some extent, but not enough to where it's effective in reducing now the overdose rates for fentanyl. And what I'm understanding is there is an increase in the production of cocaine and usage now within the United States.
Why did DEA leadership believe that law enforcement agents, rather than special operation forces, should be at the tip of the spear in remote jungle raids?
Because no one understood drug trafficking domestically or internationally as well as DEA. And I would say that goes even today. DEA, we are the subject matter experts in global narcotics trafficking. DEA was really responsible. Steve Murphy and Javier Piñera were responsible for bringing down the Escobar Medellin cartel, of course, working in conjunction with their Colombian counterparts. Those same agents and other agents also helped bring down the Cali cartel. DEA has proven over and over again over the last 32 years of my career that they play a critical role in identifying, investigating, and prosecuting global narcotics traffickers. As you can see, Manuel Noriega, recently arrested with the assistance of the U.S. military and intelligence agencies. Excuse me.
You're talking about Maduro, Nicolas Maduro.
I'm sorry, Nicolas Maduro. Correct. Yeah, Noriega. Yeah, that was. I'm sorry. Nicolas Maduro was brought back and is now being prosecuted by DEA. Noriega was arrested and brought back by DEA and prosecuted. Victor Booth, the merchant of death, who was released under the Biden administration, was brought back and prosecuted by DEA. So DEA has a very long track record of going after the international drug traffickers as well as those in domestic trafficking.
How did the U.S. government balance secrecy versus publicity when announcing or describing a Snowcap to domestic and foreign audience?
Well, therein lies I would say the challenge of working with Snowcap and other clandestine operations. And of course, DEA, we are not a military organization. We are a law enforcement organization. Our objective is to apprehend, prosecute, and convict those individuals in violation of 18 USC who bring in narcotics to the United States. So trying to maintain a public face while trying to run clandestine operations, protecting the identity of the agents, the operations, and the methods of collecting intelligence, whether signet or human, is also a high priority for DEA. So, there has to be a happy median between working clandestinely and protecting those methods of operations, and then working publicly, ensuring prosecution and that the rights of those individuals who are arrested are fully respected and see just prosecution in the United States.
How did the early media coverage of the Snowcap shape public expectation about what the operation will achieve in Latin America?
Well, one of the reasons I joined DEA back in 1989 is I was watching a Snowcap special put on by 60 Minutes, which
It was
showed
a very good special. I saw that.
great special. I saw that and I said to my mother, I said, law school's off the table. I'm joining DEA. I have to be part of that mission. And 60 Minutes at that time showed a very comprehensive 1 hour special that showed you how agents progressed from the street to training to operations in various countries in Central and South America, where they were working with the host country counterparts, sharing intelligence, building that camaraderie, conducting joint operations. And it showed the success, right? It showed agents working side by side with foreign special operators, making massive drug seizures, taking down massive drug labs, and seizing those essential precursor chemicals.
What specific aircraft, such as UH-1s, Huey helicopters, and other platforms, did the Department of Defense provide for you guys to utilize under the operational control?
Well, it was a great holistic, all of government approach on the U.S. I mean, DEA worked closely with the U.S. military, who supplied, as you said, those air assets. They supplied some intelligence information. With the Escobar situation, we had support from the U.S. intelligence community. We had support from the U.S. Navy. Really, it was a primary example of how the U.S. government, from law enforcement, the military, and intelligence agencies, can work together in a comprehensive manner, each protecting their means and methods of operations to achieve a common goal, a common outcome. And I think it's what we need to get back to in order really to address what we're dealing with now in terms of the escalation from narco trafficking to narco terrorism, primarily focusing on Mexico, Colombia, and Peru.
How were logistic bases, airstrips, and forward operation locations chosen within Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador during the Snowcap mission? Because I mean, you have to be in a proximity to where the danger is, but not so close to what you'll be attacked all times, day and night, while sleeping.
Well, in Bolivia, we had offices in, this is common knowledge, in Trinidad. We had offices in Chimaray. And those offices, they were our bases of operations. Of course, Trinidad, I believe the average distance a Huey could fly at that time was roughly 300 miles. So within that 300-mile range, we would target all the illicit drug trafficking operations within the range of that Huey, right? We would clean those areas out. Then we would set up forward operating bases where we could refuel and then launch additional operations, pushing further and further into the jungles, pushing the traffickers further and further back, costing them millions of dollars in the continuous breaking down and reestablishing of those trafficking, those clandestine laboratories. So we were extremely successful in pushing the cartel and pushing the clandestine drug labs deeper and deeper into the jungle, which obviously cost a lot of money and manpower to rebuild, because for cocaine production, you need a source of water. So you had to be near a river or a tribute where water was coming in, a river of some sort. You had to go in and clear dense jungle. You had to set up clandestine airstrips. So we were very successful in causing the traffickers to constantly have to break down and reestablish those laboratories, which also results in the reduction of their ability to produce cocaine. It makes it harder to smuggle precursor chemicals in from the ports that have to go on boats, then to the rivers, then to the labs. Then they have to be brought inland, perhaps 5 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles to support those laboratories. So Operation Snowcap, it wasn't just about search and destroy. It was about breaking down the entire supply chain that allowed clandestine laboratories and clandestine airstrips to operate.
How did the DEA integrate host nation police units like UMOPAR in Bolivia into Snowcap in operational plan and execution? And how were these units vetted to eliminate, not completely, the corruption factor that permeates these countries because of the low pay wages, and also that they come out of those communities, indigenous communities, and that is their source of livelihood.
You know, this is where our partners, the U.S. Embassy, the State Department, INL, right, came in. INL basically is the narcotics division for the U.S. Embassy, who supported Operation Snowcap with funding. So, you know, as you mentioned, we would have to locate, for example, I worked with the UMAPAR, which is really Bolivia's special for counter narcotics officers and agents who work in the jungle areas. So we would recruit the cream of the crop, the best of the best. We would then train them. We would then integrate them vet them, of course, through the State Department, INL. We give them equipment, and we also gave them a bonus incentive to work with us, right, to reduce the probability of agents or officers being corrupted by the narco traffickers, right? So each unit would have between 8 to 10 UMAPA that worked with DEA in Bolivia. You know, we didn't just work with them; we communed with them. We lived with them at their base of operations. We would go to their kids' birthday parties. We would be integrated. We would be family, right? That was the whole idea of working jointly with that host country. And we built that bond, we built that partnership of trust, because when you're in the jungle and you're in a firefight, you've got to rely on those 4 or 5 UMAPA to have your back. They had to rely on us to have their back. And that's why we were really successful, because DEA, you know, the agents that worked in those operations, you know, incredible men and women who had the ability to integrate and partner with various host country counterparts, and just as though they were DEA agents themselves. And that's really the strength of DEA today, is our ability to go all over the world and work with, counter narcotic agents from China to Central and South America to Central Asia to the Far East, right? DEA has one of the best foreign integrated law enforcement programs in the world.
What protective measures, including armor, communication gear, and medevac plans, were a standard operating procedure in the Snowcap in the jungle areas?
You know, that was one of the areas of training that was really focused on in Ranger School is, field trauma. An agent gets shot, what do you do? You know, if a helicopter goes down and you're stranded in the jungles, what do you do? And this is where a lot of training came from our partnership with the Special Forces, the SF units, who are probably one of the best clandestine operating units the U.S. military has to offer. So we received a lot of training on how to survive in those austere, hazardous jungle environments. And that training, we don't talk about, but a lot of agents were wounded in armed conflict with narco traffickers, with accidents, and it was on the responsibility of the agents and our host counterparts to treat those individuals. And knock on wood, we were successful. We never lost anyone in an actual combative situation with the narco traffickers during Snowcap.
The agents that participated in Snowcap, did they get any trauma after treatment for PTSD and other problems that you develop from being isolated and out there risking your life for a long, because when you say 90 days, it sounds like a short period of time, but when you're in that environment, even 1 day is a long time.
Again, I have to hand it, my Snowcap, brotherhood and sisters, we were really a cut above. I mean, you said 90 days could seem like 190 days when you're working in the monsoon season in Bolivia and you're out in that jungle 4 to 5 times out of a week. People are shooting at you. You're worried about the mosquitoes, the fire ants, and everything else out there that could kill you, right? As far as I know, I don't know any agents who had post-traumatic stress syndrome from those operations, but certainly if they did need assistance, DEA had a program of individuals who could work with that, right? I wasn't actually involved in any of that, but certainly there were opportunities for agents, if there were any issues, that they could work with the agency and get some assistance.
And also, the public don't understand being out there in the jungle in rainy season. To travel 1,000 meters could take a long time because you're walking in water high mud, and moving has to be very calculated because you also have the enemy uh, that could be anywhere lurking. So movement is not as you see in the movies that they go from place to place at a fast pace in that environment. How was that when you were working down there?
I'll give you a quick story. I'll try and make it very quick. My specialty was precursor chemicals, tracking the precursor chemicals, because to me, without the chemicals, you can't make anything, right? You absolutely need the chemicals. So I was working with a confidential informant who had developed a location where there was a rather significant precursor chemical storage hub deep within the Bolivian jungle. But at that time, it was monsoon season. So we had, from various means of operation, we identified where that laboratory, where that storage hub was. So we took 8 agents, 4 UMAPA, 4 DEA. We flew out to the location within 6 or 7 miles to where that laboratory or that storage hub was. So we were able to land. And within half a mile of walking in the right direction, the trail was completely washed out due to the monsoon season. There was this water everywhere. So we were like, we could either go back and scrub the mission, or we could kind of figure a way to move forward. So we backtracked and we found 4 or 5 canoes that had been made by the indigenous individuals in that area. So we took those canoes and the informant, and we went, I don't know how long it was, but we were able to find dry land again, get back on the trail, and we found the precursor storage hub. We demoed it, we blew it up. We actually caught one individual who was there guarding the precursor chemicals, and then took the canoes back, and it was a successful operation. But that, I look back on that now and I was like, man, that was kind of crazy. Getting in a canoe that I'm sure you're familiar with. These canoes are really at water level. And we didn't have, the air, the vest you could put on. We had, tens of pounds, we had 10, 20 pounds of equipment, ammunition, explosives, weapons, and we're in this canoe that could flip over at any time. But at the time, we weren't thinking about that. We were like, we got to finish this mission. We got to find this precursor chemical storage hub. We got to take it out, and we got to arrest any of the individuals that are there. And that's what we did. So, that's just one example of the dangers the agents voluntarily put themselves in. And of course, if we were to get into a firefight at that precursor chemical location, there's no one to come help you. The radios we had were not like the radios today. We couldn't radio for help. So it was on the agents on the ground. You're going to have to manage that situation. You're going to have to push through, and you're going to have to take care of whatever you face in that jungle situation, because there is no one to come. No one's coming to help you. It's all on the agents and those host country counterparts. So, that was another aspect which many people really don't understand. When you talk about Operation Snowcap, so unless you were there on the ground and you had these experiences, you really don't know how dangerous that mission actually was.
The canopy in the jungle sometimes don't even allow the sunlight to come through. It's so thick. And you're dealing with jaguars, you're dealing with panthers, you're dealing with all types of creatures that are also hungry, and you could become part of their meal. I mean, being separated from your team in a firefight is one of the biggest dangers, because you get disoriented, and to come back to your team, you have to be well prepared on land navigation. I was in the Army for 6 years, a little bit over 6 years, so I'm very familiar with that type of operation. I mean, we spend a lot of time in the field, so it's always training and training and training. But for a civilian law enforcement agent, to take on that role is not that easy. And I give you a lot of credit to all of the agents that participated in Snowcap, because it takes a lot of training.
You know, when I was a young agent, just joining DEA, the closest I've ever come to a jungle was watching a show on National Geographic. Right? I never was even in a forest. I never went to to Yellowstone National Park. So for me, it was a completely alien concept. But when we went to Ranger School training, we spent a lot of time on understanding the dangers of the jungle. Actually, the jungle itself was more dangerous than the narco traffickers, because it was like, all those pretty flowers you see, all those pretty frogs and plants, all those, or most of them, can kill you, right?
Kill you, right?
So, if you got to watch out for the army ants, you got to watch out for malaria, you have to watch out for the poisonous snakes. If you were to get bit by one of the dozens of poisonous snakes in the Amazon jungle, you were dead. There's no way you're going to make it back in time. So, in addition to dealing with the threat from narco traffickers, you had to survive the jungle. And when you talk about triple canopy, that's canopy at 3 different levels. So it could be 12 o'clock in the afternoon, let's say in July, normal temperature, let's say it's 95 degrees. Once you're down under that triple layer of canopy, now you've got that humidity. That 95 goes up to 110, 115 degrees. And it's almost nighttime. So the traffickers intentionally push their bigger laboratories in the densest part of the jungle, one, so the aircraft, helicopters, and spotter planes couldn't locate their operations. And two, it's very difficult for agents to land. So you would have to land a helicopter, say, maybe 5 or 6 miles, maybe 10 miles from the actual lab, and then you have to walk in through the jungle to find that laboratory. And of course, you're relying on confidential informants who you hope are telling you the truth and not leading you into an ambush, right? So there are all sorts of unseen dangers that Snowcap agents faced when doing that operation for 4 to 5 years. But, like I said, luckily, we were very successful in that operation, not only in Bolivia, but also Peru and Colombia, where we never lost an agent in any of those operations.
How were the evidence collection and chain of custody and prosecution handled after raids in remote areas, especially when host nations' judicial systems were weak?
That also presented a very interesting situation. So, of course, DEA, we had, as a foreign law enforcement partner, we had no official law enforcement authority to make arrests and prosecute, right? All prisoners or individuals who were arrested by the UMAPA, which is why it was so important that we had them on those operations. Now, concerning any narcotic seizures, we found the clandestine cocaine laboratory. At that time, unfortunately, all we could do was burn it to the ground, because we didn't have the ability to move those narcotics and to safely dismantle that location. So any drugs on scene would simply be burned or destroyed. And then the precursor operation I mentioned earlier, I was also the demo guy, so I was trained in using explosives, in that case C4, and we blew up those precursor chemicals because there was simply no other way to remove it from those jungle locations, and we couldn't afford to have it fall back in the hands of the traffickers, who would then use it to make narcotics. And unfortunately, that's still the problem today with the increased operations in the jungles, especially in Colombia, where those jungle operations are very active, and in Peru. The only thing you can do is basically maybe take a representative sample, take a photograph of what you discovered, and then destroy the rest on scene.
Were there any significant disputes over whether Snowcap was a law enforcement program, a military support mission, or a hybrid? And how did that affect resourcing?
I think that
was very political. I mean, in Washington, everything becomes a problem.
Yeah, it was very political. Even within DEA, there were those agents who said, you're a DEA agent, you're not a ranger, you're not military. This is not your mission. Your mission is to be working here in the United States. But, I, as a young agent, I didn't see it that way. I said, hey, look, if we can affect change at the center of gravity, then that's where we need to be. That's why DEA has offices all over the world, because we realized that the narcotics problem cannot be solved simply within the U.S. borders. I think that's even a more realistic perception today, that if DEA is going to have any traction, or the United States for that matter, any traction in mitigating how these narco-terrorist operations function, we have to take the fight to the enemy. And of course, as you mentioned, of course, it was very political in Washington. There were a lot of individuals in the government who didn't think the funding to support Snowcap, which was a very expensive operation, as you can imagine, should be spent on that. That money should be spent on domestic, either harm reduction, addiction treatment, or into law enforcement. And of course, today, I think we see the reality of that argument, that if we had been allowed to maintain and increase Operation Snowcap in the countries that produce narcotics, perhaps there's a chance we would not be so we would not be stuck in this situation, which we cannot seem to get ourselves out of at this time.
Do you think the abandonment of the U.S. government towards Latin America for over 26 years led to the Cartel de los Soles in Venezuela, where the dream of Pablo Escobar to become a political figure and one day president of Colombia, if allowed to go forward, that Maduro and its people were able to turn a country into a narcotic hub controlled by a political party like the Chavismo and the Madurismo as we know it today?
I wouldn't characterize it as the U.S. government abandoning Latin America, or DEA for that matter. I think the political climate changed, right? This is the power of the cartels. Cartel money, and we're talking about billions of dollars set aside to actually turn states into narco states, right? Venezuela, prime example. The politics shifted. New leadership came in that were aligned with the cartels that pushed the U.S. government out, including DEA. In Bolivia, you have Morales. Politics shifted. He was anti-American. He pushed DEA out and the U.S. Embassy. Politics shifted in Colombia. Even today, you have the president of Colombia not necessarily aligned with U.S. policy on drug trafficking. Certainly, I don't want to get into the delicacies of the political situation. That's not really my field of expertise. But as the politics shifted in these countries, the cartels were able to increase their stronghold. Primary example of that is the Cali cartel. The Medellin cartel goes down. The Cali cartel comes in and makes an arrangement with the president of that country at that time, funding his campaign, which eventually forced him out of office. So the cartels are very astute at getting into these governments, certain governments, and corrupting them from the top down, making it very difficult for the U.S. Embassy, DEA, and U.S. administration to work with those governments to have a successful counter-narcotics program. Now, it's my understanding the new leadership in Bolivia is very anxious to get the U.S. Embassy back, to get DEA back, so we can start addressing the illicit production of coca and its transition or its transformation into coca paste, which then goes to Peru and Colombia for refinement. So I think the U.S. administration's new program under this administration, under the Trump administration, is to re-engage those countries in Latin America to see how we can help them reduce the growth of the cartels, which has taken place over the last 20 years.
What procedures were in place to distinguish between guerrillas, traffickers, and non-combatant in villages in contested areas?
Well, I think that's even today, that's a major problem in Colombia. I mean, as we said earlier, the FARC, which was a revolutionary group, M19, also a revolutionary group. These groups started out as revolutionary groups, got involved in narcotic trafficking as security elements to protect the labs, to protect the coca fields. They saw how much money was involved, and then they actually said, let's just take over the business. Let's take over the production cycles in these remote areas. And of course, the cartels, they had to work with it because they didn't have the manpower to go out into the jungles. But using FARC as an example, a number of years ago, FARC came to the table and said, hey, look, we want We want amnesty. We want to get out of the insurgency business, and we want to get out of the narco trafficking business. And some FARC split down the middle. Some got out, got the amnesty, and some said, no, we're going to remain narco traffickers. And to this day, FARC is still a major problem for the Colombian government, as well as some of the insurgency groups. And again, at the death of Pablo Escobar, Forbes estimated his worth at some $32 to $36 billion. And that was at the very beginning of narco trafficking. I would have to say, if Pablo Escobar was still operating today, he would be worth maybe 60 to 70 billion dollars. So that's the kind of money that these insurgency groups and these narco trafficking groups are bringing in on a yearly basis. And that's a lot of money to corrupt government officials, to bribe local police officers, to win the support of the people, right? Pablo Escobar, genius at public community service. He built hospitals. He built aid. He provided food and sustenance for the local people who support him. I think to this day, still some people celebrate Pablo Escobar as a Robin Hood, a narco trafficking Robin Hood, for some example. So, I think drug trafficking, it really exposes the inefficiencies in some countries of taking care of those who live in impoverished conditions, who perhaps have been forgotten or neglected by the government. They then lend their support to anyone who's going to help them survive, right? That's human nature. So it just shows us that we cannot abandon people in these countries who live below the poverty level. There has to be some attempt to raise up the standard of living in these drug production countries in order to show them that there is another way, that you don't have to go to supporting drug trafficking in order to make a decent wage to provide, housing and subsistence to your families. Because that's, at the end of the day, that's what we all want.
How often did the Snowcap mission directly led to the follow-up investigations have the chain towards the cartel leadership rather than just destroying infrastructure?
Well, that's the whole part. I mean, Snowcap was not just a search and destroy mission per se. It was an intelligence collection mission, because we had agents in many of these countries who were the primary investigators, right? Who didn't go out into the field, but were running, tier 1, tier 2 investigations, targeting what we call the kingpin strategy. What's the upper leadership of these organizations? And through the intelligence developed from those investigations, some of that information came down to Snowcap to actively go out and destroy the labs, destroy the airstrips, and to go after those individuals who were running those operations. So the investigation, the intelligence part of Snowcap, or those foreign agents assigned to investigate, kingpin trafficking organizations, worked hand in hand with the field operations that were designated to go out and put, boots on the ground and mitigate the capability of those organizations to mass produce narcotics. So you had two very critical operations that came together to effectively mitigate, cartel operations.
Were there any particular regions or corridors known among agents as no-go or exceptional high-risk areas, and why?
Well, certainly, even in Bolivia and in Colombia, we simply, Snowcap and the host country counterparts, were simply not equipped with the manpower and intelligence to go deep into the jungles, especially the areas controlled by Sendero Luminoso and, let's say, the FARC, because they had not just hundreds of insurgents, they had thousands of insurgents. They had armies, right, that were in those jungles. And even today, the Colombian military and its federalized paramilitary police still can't go into some of those areas without risking high casualties. So, Operation Snowcap was not designed as a counterinsurgency operation. It was designed as a counter-narcotics operation. So, we could not go into those areas without risking, high casualty rates. And as I said before, once you get dropped off and you go in with your 8 to 10, agents and host country counterparts, you're on your own. There's no way anybody can get to you to help you if you find yourself surrounded by 100 insurgents. You're going to lose that battle. So, of course, we had to be very smart. And in some areas, I remember many missions, we simply denied. We couldn't go to those areas because we simply didn't have the manpower, resources, and capability to go into those areas.
There are areas that are booby trapped, either minefields or regular booby traps. And do you encounter any booby traps when you were out there um, searching for the labs or going after the big plantations or airfields? Do you guys encounter any booby traps?
For my 4 or 5 years in Snowcap in Bolivia and other countries, my team, we were fortunate. We never came across any booby traps, such as the camouflage pits. People, they would dig deep holes in the ground. They would put the spikes in, or they would put spikes in on the trails to some of the laboratories. We really didn't see any sophisticated booby traps at that time. Of course, that experience may be different for other agents in different countries, but we were fortunate. Our primary concern was ambush, right? Ambush, because we're relying on many times information from informants. And as I said before, when we were looking for those precursor chemicals, if that informant had been corrupted, he could have easily led us into an ambush where 50 or 60 traffickers could have been waiting for us. And that would have been a very difficult situation to get out of. So, again, the risk that the agents, the men and women of Snowcap took were significant. And as I said, fortunately, no one was ever killed. And I think that goes to the training that the agents received. It goes to credit. A lot of credit goes to the counterparts, as I said, who had our back, who were highly motivated. And it goes to the operational success that DEA had. And the traffickers, they were scared. It was, hey, we don't want to fight with these guys. We just want to get away, because we don't want more agents to come, more UMAPA, for example, in Bolivia to come. Let's just throw a few rounds downrange and let's just escape, live to fight another day. But I think today that mentality has changed, especially with the cartels, the narco trafficking, or the foreign terrorist organizations in Mexico, right? The Zetas, for example, Sinaloa cartel, CJ&G. I would say they're as effectively armed and trained as any DEA agent or military, at least the foreign military counterparts. And it would be a very different battle today if we would put boots on the ground.
Yeah, especially with the use of drones, small drones, and they also have recruited from different special forces retirees from different countries, and they make them part of their cartel, armed paramilitary groups.
So, absolutely. Even in Mexico, there's information now the cartels are using improvised explosive devices, right? They're mining, especially when they're, basically this is targeting other cartels, right? Some of the cartel wars between, say, Sinaloa cartel and the Zetas, or Sinaloa cartel and CJ&G, the New Jalisco Generation cartel. They're using drones that perhaps have explosives attached to them. So they're learning tactics from watching groups like Al-Qaeda, from watching groups like ISIS, from watching some of the activities that the Russians are using against the Ukrainians. Like I said, they have metastasized. These are no longer, and I can't stress this point enough, these are no longer simply drug trafficking organizations. These are narco trafficking or narco terrorist organizations who have incorporated. They have tens of thousands of individuals involved in the production of narcotics, in the transportation of narcotics, and in the protection of that operation. So the way the U.S. looks at drug trafficking, it has to change, because we're no longer dealing with simple cartels.
The training received by the clandestine laboratory agents that is very unique and dangerous because of how easy it is for these chemicals to blow up, especially in close areas of buildings, apartments, or even in the jungle. I mean, where you own static electricity from your body could detonate an explosion where the agents could lose their lives. How do you handle that danger on a regular basis?
That's a really good point, because, as an individual who was tasked with locating and dismantling precursor chemical storage subs, as you know, the chemicals used to make cocaine are extremely volatile. You have all sorts of acids, gasoline, kerosene, other chemicals. And when we come across a precursor chemical depot, we didn't have advanced technology like we do today, like Raman spectroscopy, right? Raman spectroscopy is a handheld device that you can use to identify what these chemicals are. We didn't have that back then. It was we think it's gas, smells like gasoline. Okay, it smells like acid. Let's wire it up with some C4 and let's get away about 2 or 3 miles before we blow it up, because we don't know what we're blowing up. And in that particular case, where we took down the precursor chemical lab in Bolivia, we walked about 1.5 miles away. We gave ourselves a long fuse to get away, because we didn't know what we were blowing up. And from 1.5 miles away, we could see a mushroom cloud go up into the jungle. So obviously there were some other very volatile chemicals there. And when you blow up certain chemicals together, you really create an entirely different explosive substance. So it's very dangerous.
But is the toxicity in the air that could also kill you? Meaning you might not, you might think the air smells good. I remember during World War I, soldiers used to carry canaries, birds, in little cages, because when you kick up the sand, they used to put the mustard gas and things in the sand, and when the soldiers kicked it up, if the bird died, then you knew the soldiers could die if they kick it up a little bit more. So you gotta wait further enough where you guys wouldn't get contaminated, your lungs and your bloodstream and all of that.
Primary examples, you have a lot of military today who were in Afghanistan back, 20 years ago, and who were around chemical burns, right? Who were around toxic chemicals, and a lot of those officers, came down with cancer. So certainly, even back then in the Snowcap days, when you blow up a pile of chemicals, it vaporizes, it goes into the air. And when we go back, several weeks later, you see the vegetation around that area outside the explosive area was dead. So that showed you that whatever was in the air killed the vegetation. And of course, back then, we didn't know a lot about these chemicals. We didn't understand the danger to the environment, right? Whereas today, I hope everyone working in the jungles in terms of police are using some form of Raman spectroscopy, right? Some device, some technology that they can go into these labs and identify, okay, this is, especially if you're dealing with like a methamphetamine laboratory, which those chemicals are 10 times more volatile than cocaine. But these units today, they need to have the right technology to identify which chemicals are out there. Is there something new? Is there a biohazard chemical that's being used now that we don't know about? Again, this is about intelligence collection and keeping officers safe, and also protecting the environment, because we don't want to pour and dump hazardous chemicals into the water basin, which is going to kill the fish and hurt the indigenous and kill the jungle. So there are things now that we learn from Snowcap, that we learn from jungle operations, so we can now more effectively mitigate that threat without harming the environment, without harming those indigenous persons who live in the environment.
And and this is one of the things that I think a public campaign should be addressed in all of these countries, because they look at these narcotic organizations as their saviors and the people providing for them. But what they don't know, that every time they open one of these major labs, all of those chemicals that they throw on that ground goes into the water basin.
Correct.
Their kids are born with no limbs, with neurological problems, defects, and all of this that could stay in the ground for years and years to come. And I think that campaign, I have never seen a campaign done. I spoke in at different venues regarding that it's not only the damage to the American public when the drugs hit the United States, but the damage that these chemicals do to the indigenous and peasants in regions in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, and Central America, where cocaine is now being produced. I mean, you even have production of cocaine in Europe now, where they only bring the paste and then they produce it overseas. So I think a campaign like that will further the knowledge of the regular public, because the public is in a bubble. I mean, they are informed from everything that's in the internet, but there's a lot of false information. I was talking to a kid this week, and he tells me, marijuana is legal, and that's why I smoke it, because it's medically legal, and it's legal for me to smoke it. And I said, but do you know what you're smoking? The THC level of the marijuana today is over the limit compared to the marijuana of the 1960s and 70s, even the 80s, because they are playing in labs to make the THC level higher and higher, where your brain cannot process all of that THC all at once. So, legalization is good, but there has to be also in place where the government says, let's test all of these, pick stores and see what the THC level is on this marijuana that is being sold in these stores. Because, you legalize something, but people want a customer to come back for more.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not giving them that high quality, potent stuff, they're not going to come back.
No, you make several excellent points, but I really want to go back to the first point you talked about, and that's the ecological the damage being done to jungles in Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru. When you think, let's break it down. Let's look at the math, right? When you talk about hundreds of metric tons of cocaine coming out of Colombia, that takes 10 times the precursor chemicals to make. So if you got 100 tons of cocaine, and I'm not a chemist, you need 300 to 400 tons of precursor chemicals, right? And those chemicals are going into the jungles and they're being dumped. Of course, the cartels don't care about saving the jungles, right? Recently in Davos, I believe, there were a number of people talking about global warming as the number one strategic threat to the United States. I would disagree. I'd say the number one strategic threat to our Amazon basin, which provides the oxygen for human life, is narco trafficking, because they're killing the jungle for hundreds of years to come with the toxicity of these chemicals that are simply being poured into the environment. They move one lab to another lab and they spill chemicals. There's no quality control at these laboratories, right? There's no one concerned about the environment. And to compound the problem, when the interdiction units or the police find a drug lab, what do? They have to burn it. They have to pour the chemicals into the ground. That further compounds the danger to the jungle, to the indigenous people, to the food supply chain, right? The fish, the birds, and the other animals that rely on living in a clean, austere environment. No one is addressing the fact that large cartels in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia are killing the Amazon jungle, in addition to the fires, in addition to the clearing of the land for cattle. There may not be an Amazon jungle in another 10 to 15 years. While we're worried about climate change, our entire existence, which is based on the Amazon jungle, is disappearing. Now to the legalization of marijuana, of course, you make an excellent point again. The chemical enhancement, or what I call the advancement in narcochemistry, has allowed individuals who produce marijuana to produce the THC at a very, very high level. I always say to people, this is not the marijuana Paul McCartney was talking about when he was singing about it in 1960s, when the THC level was maybe 5 to 6%. The THC level, as far as I've been notified, 25 to 26%. That induces psychosis and a host of other psychological issues. So when someone 15 or 16 years old is smoking marijuana that has a 25% THC rate, you're talking about brain damage, you're talking about cardiovascular damage, you're talking about a whole host of issues which could stunt that individual's growth, his ability to learn and to be cognitively capable into the future. And not to mention, other individuals. Like I said, it causes psychosis. People often compare marijuana to alcohol. I'm not a drinker, but I could go out and have a couple of drinks and it would not cause psychosis, right? If I go out and smoke some THC that's 20 to 25%, I could have a psychotic event. I could be in a car, cause a major accident. I could do a number of things that would harm myself or other individuals. But people don't understand this pursuit of non-medical pain relief, this pursuit of pleasure, which is one of the driving reasons why America has such a high addiction rate, such a high demand for narcotics, is because people are looking for escapism. And for so many years, narcotics have been the issue, have been the go-to for escapism. We have to concentrate more on dealing with the problems that lead to narcotic addiction and start treating those problems at the root cause. Start training our children and teaching our children that narcotics are not a good thing. It is not a way to escape, and that there are other ways of coping with trauma and other issues that lead to drug addiction and drug usage. But this legalization, which in my opinion was a money grab by the individuals who are now making millions of dollars in growing and selling marijuana. The states are making millions of dollars in taxes. So, has the priority been by the state to make money over the lives of the individuals who smoke marijuana and then perhaps go on to, and I think it's definitely a gateway drug. I think a lot of individuals who start with marijuana move on to stronger substances to continue to chase the dragon, to get that high. So I think America really needs to look at legalization. Doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's a good thing. But for many kids and teenagers, well, if it's legal, then why not do it, right? And then that's the problem we find ourselves in.
But you know what the biggest problem is, and I spoken to doctors that work in the ER, is that parents are smoking next to their 4-year-old, 5-year-old and up, and the kids are becoming, they going into psychosis episodes and taken to the hospital sick from secondhand smoking because their parents blow the smoke right on top of them.
Sure.
So, legalization with no rules and no consequences cannot be a good thing for a well-developed country like the United States. I mean, if we were not so well-developed and so well-educated, I could understand why we do things the way we do. But the other thing that I disagree with the legalization is that we gave former drug dealers first chance to be the ones to get the license. If I dealt marijuana in the past and I got caught, don't you think that by you allowing me to have a license, opening up a place, do you think I'm only going to deal marijuana in my location? Think about it. No, I'm going to have a whole menu of drugs because I could make money selling marijuana, but my client might ask, can you deliver some white powder? Can you deliver this? Can you deliver that? And by the time the agencies find out, they have to get a warrant. They have to, the place is clean again. I mean, it's like a revolving door of criminality. I disagree totally as a parent. I disagree with the legalization of any drugs because it's killing our kids. Our mental institutions are on top because of so many people going in, for 5-10 days at a time with psychosis and all types of bipolarism, all types of issues. The brain doesn't develop until the age of 25, I think, right?
Correct.
So, I think that, the states are making a lot of money, but crime has gotten higher after the legalization because the money has to come from somewhere for all of these vices. If your mind is not there, how can you produce? How can you work? You can't. You have to turn into something else.
Well, certainly legalization has opened doors for criminal organizations to get involved in the legal production of marijuana. I mean, look at the recent examples in Maine. You had Chinese organized crime groups, which some speculate have some links to the CRP, right? The People's Republic of China, who were running and these illegal marijuana farms. There were other farms, I think, maybe California or somewhere on the West Coast, where they had children working in marijuana fields, illegally producing marijuana, producing it and selling it. So, legalization is opened up another Pandora's box of narcotic trafficking that the United States simply does not need. You think the Sinaloa cartel is not putting money into front companies that are getting licenses to produce legal marijuana? Of course they are. The CJ&G, the New Jalisco Generation Cartel, other criminal organizations that have nothing to do with drug trafficking say, hey, look, this is an opportunity to make millions of dollars and the state is going to pay us to do it. So you have some legal marijuana producers who are following the law, but then I guarantee you have just as many or more criminal organizations or people with criminal intent who are producing marijuana and diverting some of that marijuana out the back door and selling it on the black market. The production of legal marijuana hasn't reduced the production and importation of illicit marijuana from the cartels, right? Because if you go into a marijuana distributor and you can buy, I don't know, let's just say you're only allowed to buy a couple ounces, then you're going to go around the corner and you're going to buy half a pound from your local marijuana dealer. Because nobody just smokes one joint. Let's be clear. It's not smoke one and put it away. There's no responsible drug use happening within the illicit drug supply chain, right? That's just not happening. And to take it a step further, you look what Colorado did. I think it was in early 2020. They passed a bill which decriminalized the personal possession under 3 grams of fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine as a harm reduction program to reduce the overdose deaths related to illicit use. And guess what? It completely failed. I think a year ago, they had to pass a new bill which reversed the decriminalization. So can you imagine a state government saying, we have a harm reduction program which is going to allow the user to use dangerous narcotic substances, which, as we know, result in physical and mental addiction, which result in overdoses, which result in homelessness, poverty. I can go on and on and on, all the negative results that come from the use of narcotics. So, hey, we're going to legalize it and we're going to let you use. If I'm a drug trafficker in Mexico, I'm going right to Colorado because you know what? I can distribute narcotics all day long and no one's going to arrest the street level drug dealers because no one's arresting or at least detaining and trying to treat those individuals who become addicted. That's not only in Colorado. I think New York had a similar program. California had a similar program. And there are other progressive harm reduction states that are also looking at legalization. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why there's a movement in the United States. Some people think all drugs should be legal and that individuals should have the choice to use or not to use. And I think history has shown us that narcotics are simply too powerful. Any doctor will tell you they lead to mental and physical addiction where the individual is no longer in control of their actions. I was recently in Kensington Square in Philadelphia, which is known for being an open drug market, meaning people can sell drugs and people can use drugs and there's no law enforcement activity. And I saw people who were injecting fentanyl mixed with xylazine, which causes necrosis, which is a rotting of the flesh. I remember one young lady, she was about 19 years old. She pulled up her pants leg and on both of her calves, she had open, deep wounds where her flesh was literally rotting because she was injecting fentanyl with xylazine. And the nurses that were with me said, do you want to go to the hospital? And she said, no, because if I go to the hospital, I can't get my fix. So clearly, there's an indication that once people are addicted, especially to fentanyl, they will lose their limbs, their eyesight, their life in order to get that high. That is not an individual who is competent to take care of themselves. So it's clear to me that the legalization of any narcotic is simply a bad idea.
But you know what is worse is that if you have a child that's over the age and they have psychosis or mental problems and you go to the hospital with them, they won't even give you any information because he's an adult. But meantime, you're using your insurance to cover up for their problems. But you as a parent cannot even get information. So, we have so many rules of protection, of privacy, this and that are good when the person is capable of understanding what is going on with them. But for for put it all in a blank sheet, or because he's over the age of 18, we can't give you any information. Yeah, but he doesn't even know what his name is. Well, it doesn't matter. Once he realizes what his name is, he could tell us. We can't give you any information. So there are things in the laws or the rules that need to change, and also you cannot force somebody to go into treatment.
Correct.
They can't think straight. They don't even know where they are, but you can't put them in treatment. They have to voluntarily, and also they could voluntarily sign themselves out of treatment. So do we really want to help people, or do we really want to uphold these rules or laws that we're creating not to help people?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I mean, because HIPAA rules are I think they're important, right, to protect an individual's my medical history should be personal. I don't want people to know what my medical history is, but we need that. But at the same time, if someone, as you said, comes in, he's 18 or 19 years old, and he's having a drug reaction, and the parents come, I mean, are they allowed to get that information? Is the hospital? I mean, that's a question we have to figure out. We're in new territory, right? We're in an area which previously we didn't have to deal with. So with the expansion of narcotic distribution, especially now with more powerful substances like fentanyl, like xylazine, like nitazines, like metamidine is a new animal tranquilizer that's 200 times more powerful than xylazine. So we're under attack by narcochemistry, which is more toxic and more potent than ever before. And now we're trying to figure out, how do we deal with it on the medical side? How do hospitals deal with it? How do doctors in emergency rooms who don't have training in addiction science or addiction medicine treat it? Now do you need a psychologist and a welfare worker, a social worker, as well as a doctor, in a specially designed narcotics ward that deals specifically with individuals who come in with addiction problems? I mean, I don't have the answers. I'm just a DEA drug agent.
Don't you think that it will be wise for people to be involuntarily put into a detox program so they don't lose their lives? We're talking about American lives. We're talking about kids that have mothers, fathers, families, or that they have their own kids. And we're losing thousands and thousands of people because the rules are so strict that they cannot bend them. You have to be able to be flexible. You cannot be, I went into a place and the lady says, I cannot change that because the computer told me. I said, the computer doesn't tell you anything. We programmed the computer. Tell me who programmed that computer so we could change it so things could run smoother. It's like a catch-22. I understand the HIPAA laws, and they do protect all of our rights, and I understand that. But when somebody is mentally incapacitated, they have to allow someone that is mental capacitated, like a parent, to be able to make those choices until that person gets back to normal. But they cannot just close the door and just put the person in when the person doesn't even know where they are.
I mean, you're mentioning it's a very, very gray legal area. I mean, I think it was under Reagan, the deinstitutionalization of all the mental hospitals, right? They just closed and put thousands of people who were perhaps mentally not competent on the street, which resulted in homelessness. We still have that problem today, but we have a legal system. I mean, a lot of the unfortunate young women who were killed in the last year by undocumented individuals had been arrested for violent crimes and then released. And guess what? They committed more violent crimes. They murdered people. So we have a legal system in many states where you get arrested for a violent crime, no cash bail, you go back on the street and you reoffend. Some of the individuals being arrested now have been arrested 10, 15 times for violent crimes before they killed somebody. So I think we definitely need to look at our legal system and how we manage repeat offenders, especially violent repeat offenders, and how we manage those who are, let's say, have a significant drug addiction problem, like this young lady on the street who her legs, within a couple of months, shall have such advanced gangrene, excuse me, that those legs may have to be amputated. Is that a person that is cognitively capable of making rational decisions? I don't think so. I'm not a doctor. I couldn't tell you specifically. But in my opinion, that's not a person who can make a rational decision. But yet it is a person times thousands of other individuals who are making the decision to put dangerous narcotics into their body, which could at some point eventually kill them due to other health reasons, or simply face an overdose or poisoning, such as we're seeing with fentanyl now. For example, New York City has what they call safe injection sites, where people can come in with any narcotic. The staff will test it. For example, we come in, let's say, hey, I want to use this cocaine. Oh, we'll test it for fentanyl. They take a fentanyl test strip, and they test it, and they say, hey, this cocaine has fentanyl in it. You may not want to use it. We won't stop you from using it, but if you want to use it and you overdose, we'll Narcan you back to life. Is that the direction that we're going in as a country?
But I'm saying that
that's not true.
Almost retarded in the way that we do our thinking. You know, it's like you give a 2-year-old a loaded gun, and most of them put pressure with 2 fingers and they put it between their legs and they get shot in the face. Do you give a 2-year-old a loaded gun? We should look at drug use the same way. When somebody's so incapacitated, there should be a law or some type of ordinance that says, look, we are the state, you are one of our citizens, we care enough. Until you get better, you're going to be in the hospital, you're going to be in a clinic. It's one less problem, one less criminal to be, one less overdose victim. If we spend in billions of dollars another nonsense, we should be able to do that for our citizens. That's the least we could do. We could open up shooting sites. We could do all of this. That's money. Let's put the money where the money is needed to try to get these people back into. If I put addicts in an island where there's no drugs, and they go to school, they study after they detox and all of that, and there's no access to any drugs, do you think that they're going to miss the drug? They don't have it. Well, they're going to swim out of the island? There's thousands of miles away. We need to look for things where people could get back to normal. Well, you know, we can't just wash our hands off. It's not our problem. Because if you walk through the streets of New York at night, you go to Philadelphia, you go to Chicago, Washington, the capital of the United States, it's the same problem. Why in other countries they have a narcotic problem, but it's not as widespread? Are we too liberal? Are we too easy with the way our thought process is? I think that when liberals try to reinvent the wheel only rolls one way, and you put an angle, it won't roll as good. And I think a lot of people are trying to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's already invented. You can't change that.
I think a lot of people are trying to remove the wheels and say we don't need wheels at all, that things can just move along on their own now.
Right.
And that's the problem. This whole, what I call progressive harm reduction, where people think they can make dangerous drug use safe. For example, a couple of months ago, New York City had the first vending machine which gave people heat-resistant crack pipes and smoking kits, because typical crack glass pipes crack and they cut your lips. So they said, hey, let's reduce the harm from smoking crack cocaine and give people plastic heat-resistant crack pipes. And I saw an interview of an individual in New York. It was a woman who'd been smoking crack for 20 years, completely addicted, homeless. She said, this is the best thing ever. Now I can smoke my crack, get high, and I don't crack my lips. That was a success for the progressive harm reduction. For me, that's an immense failure in saying that we have given up the fight against drug addiction and drug distribution because we're going to make it safe for someone to kill themselves over the course of 10 to 15 years, as opposed to using fentanyl, which can kill you within 10 to 15 seconds. But still, there are those who think they can make drug use safe in this attempt, this utilitarian approach to everybody is free to do whatever they want. And that it simply doesn't work. It didn't work in all the countries that were so-called communist countries. It didn't work in Russia. It's not working in Cuba. Certainly, it didn't work in Haiti. All these failed states who tried to liberalize the rights of the individual over the rights of society, which is really what we're talking about. Now we're getting into a philosophical issue on society versus the individual, right? What's more important?
I'm going to take Mike a minute to remember these heroes, I call them, of the Bolt operation, and starting with the May 20, 1989 Cessna crash in Peru, where 6 Americans and 3 Peruvians lost their life. And I'm going to mention them by name. Special Agent Rick C. Finley, DEA. Right. Captain Jan Knapp, the pilot, a contract with the State Department. Dennis Islip, pilot. Billy McDonald, pilot. Jan Van Sant, aircraft mechanic. Clyde Bayless, U.S. Embassy employee. Peruvians killed in that flight: Mario Matallana, Hugo Samanes Castañera, and Raúl Quintana Orejuela. And let's mention the other flight. Give me a second.
Peru.
In Peru. Let me get back to the okay. The aircraft was Casa 212 light transport aircraft.
B-12.
Casualties were all 5 DEA special agents on board: Frank C. Wallace Jr., J.W. Seal, Juan C. Bars, Meredith Thompson, and Frank Fernandez Jr. I'd like to take a moment of silence and prayer for their soul and their families, because when you visit the DEA Museum in Washington, D.C., you look at the Wall of Honor, many people don't remember their names. And we do a lot of programs, and we never speak about the sacrifices. Edward Hatcher in Staten Island, and so many others, including a special agent in the Embassy of Colombia, the former embassy, where an informant came and killed him at his desk. I don't know if you remember that case.
And let's not forget Kiki Camarena.
Kiki Camarena, and so many others that have died. And I you know, it really touches me, because the sacrifice of a lot of law enforcement in the United States, and the way law enforcement is being treated by the media and by other extremist groups, is very unfair, because there are families left behind, and lives taken at a very young ages, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Meredith Thompson was a personal friend of mine. I did a tour with her in Bolivia, and just before she went to Peru, and I said, Meredith, are you going to Peru now after Bolivia? She says, the job's not done, Mike. I just feel the need to stay here and keep working. She could have easily gone home, seen her family, excuse me, taken a vacation, but she got on a plane and went from Bolivia to Peru to continue the mission, and she lost her life servicing her country, right? So, I mean, this is the level of dedication that individuals, Snowcap and DEA in general, DEA, no doubt, one of the most dangerous law enforcement jobs there can be, but yet men and women join DEA to serve their country to a higher, they come to a higher calling.
I really appreciate you being here with me today, Mike. We ran out of time. I hope that we could do another program in the near future. I really enjoy your knowledge and everything that you brought to the table today. I really appreciate it, my brother.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, we could talk for another 6 hours. There's so much to talk about, so much to inform the American people about how the cartels are continuing to smuggle narcotics into the country. And we didn't talk about domestic drug trafficking organizations, which are the very distribution pipelines for those foreign terrorist organizations. So I hope we can come back at another time and talk about some other aspects of global narcotic trafficking.
Yes, most definitely. And you let me know when you have time, and we'll put a program together.
Yeah, I could go
God
tomorrow.
bless
I can talk about this all day long. So.
Yeah, God bless you and your family, and thank you for your service and your dedication and continued success in everything you're doing now in private life.
Absolutely. Thank you for having this podcast and getting this information out. I think this is incredibly important for the public to understand just the difficulties and the dangers that lie out there for those who raise their hand, put on the badge and the gun, and go out to try and protect them every day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes this episode of Equalizer Podcast. A special thanks to retired Special Agent Michael Brown for sharing his remarkable career and valuable perspective from more than 32 years of dedicated service. If you like this episode, please give it a like and share it with your family and friends. And don't forget to follow me to the links that appear on your screen for more interviews, stories, behind the scenes, insights from the world of law enforcement and intelligence. I'm your host, William Acosta. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, stay safe out there, and God bless you.